I'd like to introduce Dr. James Ballands, who is an Associate Lecturer in Film and TV and a Research Associate for Sign at the University of York, and he will give you a presentation entitled Teaching the Reality of Working in the Screen Industries.
Yes, good morning everyone. I'm James and I'll be talking for the next 10 to 15 minutes about my research for Sign. Okay, so I joined Sign as a researcher back in August last year, and this in a nutshell is the aim of my research project, to create a resource pack of teaching and learning materials that will help to prepare students for the reality of working in the screen industries. So the perceived need for a pack of teaching and learning resources was recognised by academics who attended a symposium at York St John last year. I believe the symposium was called Screen Education, and this is one of the ideas that emerged from the symposium. Based on what I've observed and researched, there are obviously numerous courses that offer training for jobs in the screen industries, whether it's teaching you how to use editing software so you can edit your own films and TV shows, or how to develop video games using software. However, while students are being given valuable information to prepare them for their dream roles, there is also the sense amongst many academics and commentators that students aren't being given an accurate insight into what working in the screen industries is really like, or what they will be expected to do in order to secure employment and compete for jobs. So it's a narrative that we're all very familiar with, I think. So these tensions are nicely encapsulated in this quotation from Richard Wallace at the University of Bournemouth, and I promise you this is the only lengthy scholarly quotation I'll be reading verbatim today. Okay, so just the one, I get a free pass. Teaching students aspiring to media work presents the educator with a fundamental dilemma. On the one hand, students require the knowledge and skills necessary to find and sustain employment within existing industry practices, systems, and structures. On the other hand, students need to be prepared for the uncertain and shifting nature of media work and highly problematic aspects of some of these self-same practices, systems, and structures. How do you ensure the former without condoning or underplaying the latter? So these are some of the central tensions that my work will be looking at. So as I've explained, I've been doing this researching this part-time for a few months now. So this is a broad overview of what I've done so far. I have, of course, conducted a literature review, which I'll be talking about very shortly. So I've been looking at texts written about screen industries, education, and employability. I've identified the main themes that my resource pack will cover, and I've identified 5, and I will give you my rationales for choosing those. And I've also created a questionnaire, a dreaded questionnaire, that I've disseminated amongst staff at York and other Sign-affiliated universities. So I imagine that a few of you have already filled in my questionnaire. I'll be milling around later, and if you teach in the screen industries and you feel you have expertise that would add to my project, the questionnaire is a mere 15-20 minutes to complete. So yeah, don't be a stranger, basically. So that's my plug for my questionnaire. Okay, so I won't go through all my literature review, but these are the headlines of my research, and again, I'm sure these won't surprise you too much. So there is understandably a huge emphasis on the precarious nature of screen work, and I've missed out nature there, that's very annoying. Also, the unfortunate necessity of unpaid or low-paid work. This is constantly being underlined. Many commentators stress the dilemma of balancing practical skills with an awareness of the constantly shifting nature of the screen industries. I think it's a necessary flaw of a kind of unavoidable flaw, an inevitable flaw of the project, that once I've created the resource pack, it will quite shortly thereafter become not exactly obsolete, but slightly outdated, but such as the constantly shifting and changing nature of the screen industries. And again, something I'm sure that many of you will be familiar with, numerous scholars and industry professionals address the fact that graduates don't begin their screen careers with the requisite soft skills such as problem solving, leadership, time management, etc. So these are the broad headlines of my literature review thus far. So these are the central themes of my resource pack that I've identified with the help of Jude Brayton and John Swords. So the first topic is, of course, career prospects and employability. So the idea that university teachers would address these issues head-on in the context of a seminar or a lecture or a tutorial. The next topic, recent developments, news stories, covers a whole range of different issues, from the emergence of a new streaming site to Channel 4 looking like it was going to be privatised, and then the decision to not privatise Channel 4, again responding to the many changes that occur within the screen industries that change the working environment. We felt that technological developments deserved its own category. Obviously, if you're working in video games or certain elements of film or television, there's a huge emphasis on technological know-how, and there are constant developments in that area. We felt that equality, diversity and inclusion also merited its own theme within the resource pack. And we also highlighted problem-solving skills as well, which is not to denigrate the other soft skills such as teamwork or leadership. It was just the one that we decided to put a spotlight on. Okay, so these are the central themes. So I'm just going to talk very briefly, because I appreciate time is pressing, about some of the results of my questionnaire thus far. So as I say, I've sent this questionnaire to members of staff at the University of York, but also other SIGN-affiliated universities, just to get a greater sense of how the staff members were engaging their students on these particular topics. So I asked them, how often do you engage with your students about how to get a job or to develop a career within the screen industries? And that can be in a lecture, a seminar, workshop, etc. So as this chart indicates, it's basically discussed on a weekly or a termly basis, so very regularly. I do intend to conduct interviews with some people who've filled in the questionnaire to get a greater sense of what they are exactly doing. And in the questionnaire, I asked them to give specific examples. I'm just not going to talk about it now because of time. Moving on slightly, I asked them about how often they engage with recent developments and news stories. In this instance, development refers to an event, an announcement, or the publication of a new report. And again, 2/3 of my participants say that they reference new developments within the screen industries on a weekly basis, and I will be interrogating this more when I crunch the data. Moving on slightly. For technological developments, the results change slightly, but 3/4 of lecturers refer to recent technological changes either weekly or termly, which is very, very pleasing. So when I was sending out this questionnaire, I had a sense of how colleagues in my department were engaging with these issues on an anecdotal level. But I was surprised at times that, particularly with academics who also have a career within the screen industries, that they wouldn't draw on their own expertise more. So just anecdotally, I spoke to a lecturer of screenwriting and asked them how often they would draw on their own experience of writing films, writing TV shows in the context of a lecture or seminar, and they said that they rarely did, if ever. And I thought I was surprised by that, because it seems like such a valuable resource, and would of course also emphasize how important the knowledge is that they're imparting, that it comes from some of that experience, but this was something that they didn't do. Moving on slightly, we have 80% of lecturers say that they discuss equality, diversity and inclusion on a weekly basis, although 15% claim they never do, which again is something I'd like to interrogate a bit further. And on the issue of problem solving, 2/3 of participants say that they engage with students on this topic on a weekly basis. So I don't want to go through all the different questions I posed in the questionnaire, but I will have a look at this one. So I asked the participants, where do you think the students in your department learn about gaining employment within the screen industries? And these are just a few examples of the responses that I received. The top respondent suggests that it's unfortunate that too many students learn about getting screen jobs from word of mouth, rather than a reliable source. The third respondent suggests that employment is the constant context in which the teaching takes place. So it's always there in the background as being constantly mentioned. And it's the idea that this is a vocational course built to get them a career rather than the idea of learning for the sheer joy of it. The respondent below that appears to be suggesting that employability is learned outside of the lecture hall or seminar room, and I would like to speak to this participant, find out more what they mean by that. And I do, of course, recognise that within the time pressures of a lecture or a seminar, there's only so much you can discuss. So I'm not in no way critiquing these lecturers for sometimes just focusing on the immediate subject at hand. Okay, so I'm being told to wrap up. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about the next stages. So as I said before, I will be interviewing a select number of participants who have responded to my questionnaire. And if you would like to do so, then don't be a stranger. I'm here. I will be creating my own teaching and learning resources relating to the five themes that I've identified. I will be asking participants if they have any resources they would be willing to share, and that's not me being lazy. I'm eager to look for examples of best practice and try and use them wherever I can. I will then be creating a draft of the resource pack and asking for feedback from colleagues and trying it out on students. And then, of course, implementing these changes to create an improved version of the resource pack as well. Okay, so that's me finished. Thank you. Creativity or storytelling? No, I didn't. That's a good question. Let me think. So this is very much about employability. So I'm not. I appreciate the importance of creativity and imagination and opening their minds in that way. But I guess the remit of this project I saw as being about employability and also the reality of working in the industry and hoping that they aren't naive lambs to the slaughter when they enter the industry. Although I'm not suggesting that they aren't aware, of course, of the precarious nature of work or the fact that they will have to start at the bottom of the ladder. So yeah, that was my remit. Thank you.
Linked to that really is, do you ask anywhere about their engagement with industry? How much engagement is part of their course with industry? How much lecturers and the students engage with industry?
With industry professionals coming in to...
Yes, or going out for placement or whatever,
I don't actually know. The questionnaire is really asking about what the lecturers themselves do. I suppose it is something they could mention themselves when I'm asking how do they learn about the reality of the screen industries or employability, but it's very much honing in on what they themselves do to see where I can possibly make changes.
I guess for me, my train of thought was because actually, ultimately, they're going to be employed by industry, aren't they? So,
yeah.
It's just to me was a gap, that was all.
Oh, no, I appreciate that, thank you.
It's really interesting to hear about what you're doing. I thought it was really interesting that you kind of focused on this idea of employability, and I wondered if you'd kind of thought critically much about what that is and what kind of whether your resource pack was kind of questioning that, because I think it is quite ideological, this idea that we are teaching students to focus on themselves as subjects of employability and the kind of dispositions and workers that produces.
Yes, thank you. And I dislike the idea that they're only doing this course in order to be employable, although of course it is a partly a vocational course that they're often taking as well. And something that I didn't mention, but which I also think is important, is I want them to feel that they're empowered to try and change the working culture as well. And that is something I'll also be considering. But when I took on the project, the idea was very much addressing this knowledge gap through teaching resources. But I definitely take your point.
It's not a question, but just really briefly, really interesting work coming out of this kind of, I guess economics, not my area of expertise, but alternative models of what we mean by entrepreneurialism and enterprise, coming from post-growth and sustainability and seeing prosperity post-growth. And I think the creative industries has got lots potentially to learn from that. I mean, I'm still engaging with it as myself, but there's some really interesting work that I think should be speaking to this topic as well.
Thank you. Thanks so much, James, and
Thank
thanks
you.
Next up, I'd like to welcome Dr. Bethan Jones to the floor, who is a research associate for Sign at the University of York, and she will be giving a presentation from webinars to shared apprenticeships, creating a taxonomy of training for the screen industries.
Hi all. I'm hoping that there'll be a slide up.
I'm just finding it on my video.
Cool. So like Nina said, my name is Bethan Jones and I'm a research associate with Sign. It's kind of really interesting coming after James's presentation because I'm looking a lot at skills and training within the screen industries more broadly. This paper is looking at film and television, and I know I've spoken to some people in the room when I was conducting interviews, for which I'm very, very grateful. The current project I'm researching is looking at video games, and again comes back to this question of employability, which came up a lot in the interviews that I carried out. It's not the topic of this paper, but I'm happy to kind of talk about it maybe during lunch or during the breaks, because it is, I think, a real and very important issue when we're thinking about skills training, the screen industries, HE, FE industry, so on and so forth. I'm not going to go on about sort of the skills gaps because we know they exist. They've existed for a long time, and in some respects they haven't changed a great deal. So there was a report that came out in 2014, which was a creative skill set film employer panel. And they identified skills shortages in first ADs, producers, production accountants, and skills gaps in prosthetics, sound recording and health and safety. The BFI did a skills review last year, so 2022, we're talking 8 years later, if my maths is correct. And they also identified that there are skills gaps in things like production assistance, things like health and safety. So these things aren't changing. These things are very much the same. And one of the questions that I sort of had come into this project was, well, if we've known about these skills gaps for some time, if they broadly remain the same, why do they still exist? And in some respects, I think this comes back to what Kate mentioned in the first talk this morning about the engagement between industry, employers, HE, FE, academia, how that all works, and perhaps some of the expectations that each has about the other, or some of the assumptions that are made about the other. One of the big things that we hear is that graduates aren't work ready. One of the big things here is about these soft skills. And what I'm trying to do is actually say, well, no, they're not soft skills, they're professional skills. Like, we need these. You have to be able to communicate with people. You have to be able to work in a team. So they're not soft by any stretch of the imagination. They can actually be quite difficult to teach as well. And, certainly when I was a student, I didn't want to work in a group. I wanted to do it on my own. Now, after having worked for some time, I know that that's not going to happen. Like, whatever I do, I have to work with people. But it's kind of, how do we foster that? How do we deal with that? So what I wanted to do, and this was quite a big project. The report is up on the Sign website if anyone's interested, although I'm going to focus on kind of a specific area in this talk. I wanted to look at how training is kind of understood, how it is used by those within industry. So I started off by looking at the Screen Skills website, and I did that because Screen Skills is a really well-known source within the screen industries. I looked at the websites of training providers that are listed on Screen Skills, and these included colleges, universities, charitable organisations, training providers, film schools, consultancies, screen agencies, and so on and so forth. You can see some of the... No, you can't. That's not that screen. You take my word for it. There were a lot of different organisations kind of listed. But what I noticed, which is where this slide comes in, is there wasn't any sort of standard way that training was listed across these provider websites. So I kind of came up with these 12 primary categories, which is what you can see on the slide. And course was the most common one. That was followed by training. Then you had study, other, which is such a nebulous term, it doesn't mean anything. Apprenticeships, which I personally tried to push for a lot, because before I was at the University of York, I worked for Welsh Government and I worked on skills and apprenticeships. So as Jude and Pip and other colleagues will tell you, I am really keen to push apprenticeships as a route. Not that I'm going to try and like evangelise throughout this talk. But what I did find, under each of these categories, the types of provision available was huge. Like, there were over 1,000 different types listed across these websites. And that was things like degrees, events, HNCs, workshops, coaching, podcasts, videos. All of these came under this broad umbrella of training. And that's a huge amount of training. It's a lot for me to kind of look at. And I sort of know a bit about this industry. If I was a new entrant coming in at, say, 16, 18, 21, I wouldn't have a clue where to look. And it kind of suggests a lack of cohesion across the industry, which can be quite confusing. What I also did, in addition to looking at the Screen Skills and training provider websites, was conduct interviews. Like I said, I know I've spoken to some people in the room. I carried out, I think it was 24 in total, and that included HE, FE, training providers, people working with production companies, new entrants to the industry, and so on. I am quoting from some of these in this paper, but there were like 24 interviews, all of which lasted about an hour. So there's a huge amount of data, which is way more than I can put into 15 minutes. But what I want to focus on are kind of three main questions. How easy training is defined, if there's enough clarity about training at different levels, and where the training is seen as valuable by those kind of working within the industry. And what we've got on this slide is one training provider I spoke to who talked about this range of offerings available and the amount of confusion it can cause. And what they argued for was a centralised source for new entrants specifically, which offers relevant information about what their training and progression should look like. I've already mentioned Screen Skills, and there are other organisations that, bless you, that do exist to provide information about jobs and training in the industry. But the feeling that quite a lot of my interviewees had was there wasn't enough context provided to determine what training is relevant to a particular career pathway or career stage. So someone I spoke to at a production company, as you can see here, made the point that there's not enough information about how to make it in the industry, but certain routes are prioritised over others. And I'll just make a brief mention of apprenticeships here versus other routes, perhaps, into the industry. But what they also said is that the training that's out there only reaches the people that know about it. So a lot of people know about Screen Skills, and I spoke to tutors and lecturers who will signpost their students there, which is great because Screen Skills is a really good resource. But there are other organisations, particularly thinking about perhaps regional or, in my case, as someone from Wales, sort of national devolved organisations that might not reach so many people because no one knows about it. But I also spoke to a new entrant in the industry, and they made this kind of really interesting point, I thought, that, yeah, okay, while clarity would be nice, every job is different, every team works differently, and saying that the same things are always going to happen isn't really possible. And this kind of ties in, I think, to what the BFI Skills Review identified last year, which they suggested that the industry should adopt job descriptions to address some of the issues that have been identified in the sector. And that includes things like, greater transparency on the skills and competencies that crew need, recruiting in a more open and formalised way. And we know that those are some of the issues. But I think this would also help offer clarity in terms of what training is required to cater for specific roles, how perhaps that training could be identified or formalised or whoops, given, I can't think of the word, but, you know, how that training is circulated to people that actually want to work in the industry. But what I also think is important is this isn't just for new entrants to the industry. And that applies to kind of not only the job descriptions, but also clarity of training. Continuing professional development was something a lot of my interviewees brought up, and particularly, again, in regard to professional skills. So we saw throughout COVID a lot of people leaving the industry, whether that was from burnout, whether it was from realising it's possibly not, you know, as secure an industry as people might like. But what that meant was that people had to then step up without necessarily having the knowledge or the experience to kind of undertake those roles. So I spoke to someone in a production company, again, you can see here, and they said that this just moves the skills gap up the ladder. It doesn't address the problem, it's still there, it's just there higher up. And what they said, they stopped short of saying training should be mandatory, but they did say it should be heavily encouraged for anyone who's stepping up into a new position, like whatever that position might be. You know, they mentioned sort of budgetary skills, but it applies equally to leadership, to management, anything really. And this did used to be the case. Quite a few of my interviewees referred to kind of the old days when training was part and parcel of working for broadcasters. So the BBC was mentioned quite a lot. The move to using freelancers, which is a whole other issue that I'm not going to go into at the moment, it means that this kind of continuous training, as this interviewee said, that doesn't happen. What you get instead is training becoming piecemeal. It becomes dependent on the amount of time a freelancer's got, but also the amount of money they've got to not only pay for a training course, but take, you know, a morning, a day, a week away from work when they're going to be losing money. So one of the training providers I spoke to talked about this need for a formalised CPD framework, and kind of said that actually we've seen this through COVID. This is now something that really needs to be addressed in the industry. But what each of the quotes that I've kind of very quickly run through suggests is that clarity about what training provision is out there, how it relates to jobs and career progression, and where to find it is increasingly important. And this is where I'm kind of proposing a taxonomy of training. Now, I've pulled this data from the Screen Skills and Other Training Provider website, and it's not representative of all of the training that exists. I just want to caveat that. But I think for this purpose, as kind of like proposing a taxonomy, it does work. Now, there are different routes into the industry, obviously, and I'm kind of setting those to one side for the purposes of this. What I'm arguing is that for new entrants, there should be a more structured form of training. So we've got on the far left of the screen for you guys as you're looking at it, things like an apprenticeship, a traineeship, a degree, you know, a HNC, potentially a work placement or an internship. Caveated that with, personally, I would like to see those being paid. I know that's another issue altogether. There's a lot of issues. That's what I found doing this research. There's a lot of issues that are coming up. And when I was starting to explain to people, like, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm thinking about, they were like, oh, good luck. And I kind of feel that a bit. I'm looking at this going, there's a lot of stuff we need to do. But yeah, so if we're starting in the industry, you would do generally a longer duration training course, and it would be more general. It's not an introduction to the industry as such, but it would teach you things like not only the practicalities of what you're doing, but industry knowledge, things like how the industry works. Some of the things that perhaps you don't get taught, you pick up as you go along, but which are still really, really important. As you kind of then work your way up the ladder, you've worked in the industry for a longer period, you would start to move along, as you can see, from entrant to early to experienced to expert. And those courses would become shorter in duration, but more specific, possibly bespoke training, things like, you know, master classes and things like that. And I would say that, you know, if you're at the higher level of this, you would be doing training courses or webinars on things like your more complex issues. You'd also hopefully be doing courses or events that allowing you to keep abreast of developments in the industry. You know, as everyone has said, things like technology means that the industry is changing so quickly that you need, if you're working in there, you need to be able to understand what impact that might have. So thinking in terms of like practical, applying this to a career pathway, and again, this is sort of pulled from the training that's being offered and could obviously change depending on, you know, the job or whatever it is you're doing. So we could see someone starting with perhaps an internship, a HND, then moving into a paid internship, doing some of the kind of mandatory courses like your unconscious bias courses, which should be mandatory. I think all EDI courses should be mandatory. Things like your COVID safety courses. Then you might progress into a step-up course. So if you were looking at, I don't know, shooting, you might step up to shooting AP. You might then go on to do master classes, and then start looking at things like, you know, the higher level budgeting or leadership courses, finishing with, you know, your surgeries or receiving, or importantly, giving mentorship. Because I think that's another really important area. It's not simply you kind of do this to go up and up and up. You also give back and help to others. So this isn't prescriptive. It's not necessarily representative of the different career pathways. But I think a structured form of this kind of training provision, which clearly outlines what training is going to be most appropriate for you, depending on your career pathway, would hopefully start to move towards a more cohesive approach, and it would ideally ensure that the skills, both technical and professional, are being developed. And as one training provider told me in the interviews, there has been a gradual diminishing of the importance of training, but we know the screen industries are vitally important, as Kate said this morning. We know that there are skills gaps and skills shortages, and that needs to change if the UK is going to continue to attract the best talent and remain a key part of the UK economy. Thank you.
Hi, Bethany. Thanks so much. It's really interesting. So I'm a coach, and I'm here today to kind of get a bit more of a sense of that. And I saw that you did mention coaching in that taxonomy, and you kind of put it in the third sort of bracket along. I'm just curious about how you came to that decision to include it there.
So it's going back, I think, to that idea of early. I can't remember what my categories were. Early entry, experienced, and expert, I think, and I was kind of thinking, so for early and entrant, I wasn't sure how much coaching would be beneficial at that stage when you're sort of learning the ropes of the industry as an early career, and then sort of developing in your specific areas. So I was kind of thinking that places that in that specific two categories, things like more formalised, for want of a better word, almost classroom experiences might be better in giving the nuts and bolts of that particular thing, and then moving into coaching when you've got that bit more experience and kind of a bit more settled in your career pathway, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Kate? I think it's really good to have a taxonomy of training. I think it's really, really great. But you see, it's like everything where you try to do a binary approach. And I was like, sorry that I sparked that conversation with James.
It's fine.
I mean, education and training can't be like one theory or another, and it shouldn't be. Then we box yourselves in. Can't talk about employability because we're about education and creativity. They're perfectly, fluid ways of doing exactly that in a 3-year degree or 2-year masters or whatever. Anyway, so I think the taxonomy is good, but I also think, picking up that coaching point, that although people don't go into work in the same normal pattern as maybe other industries, because it is freelance and it's not a good thing, like ever been those, we need to get our people who are heads of departments or running departments to be more coachy in the way that they support people generate and help. And so that's a skill that the industry needs, industry inverted commas, when they're dealing with new entrants. So the taxonomy is great as long as we don't get all fixed and, you know, boxy about it.
Yeah.
Because it's really good for clarity, but it tends not to work in practice. You stick people too rigidly, you know.
Yeah, and I think that is possibly part of the reason why we still see skills gaps and shortages, even knowing about them for so long. It's so difficult to box things in, like you said, when you're dealing with an industry like the screen industries. It's not, and if there's any like accountants in the room, I apologise for using this as an example, but it's not like accountancy where you can go, right, okay, this is, you need to do this and you can put that in the box and blah, 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 blah. It doesn't work like that. But equally, I think we need to try and do something, otherwise these are going to continue. And it's this, like I said, this is, it's not prescriptive and it's still really early days, and it would require input from everybody I've spoken to, from, you know, training providers to industry broadly, to screen bodies, to, you know, charitable organisations, to HE, to FE, to get together and kind of maybe agree on how we're going to approach it, which is a whole other separate issue.
No, we have one more sentence quick. It was more just to agree with, there's almost like there's no appreciation for nuance when talking about skills development and talking about what kind of skills needs and shortages are. It's the whole argument of there's been a STEM skill shortage since the days of Charles Babbage, and there's still a STEM skill shortage, right? But it's also because people don't account for the fact that the skills is a proxy for qualifications, not necessarily skills that you may develop on the job. So we need to be clear about how we're talking about skills as well, right? About how people might move into different sectors. People from the video games industry might be coming in here. So within the taxonomy, you could argue that some of those courses would provide fluidity, because some of those would be a VFX masterclass, do Unreal Engine, do something else. So it's almost like there's a base structure through which there can be fluidity. Yeah,
and there's massively transferable skills. I mean, I was taught, and I'll keep this quick, Pip.
Sorry.
And I've been talking to people, and from my former work in Welsh Government, like, there's a massive need for joiners or for electricians. You could easily move from like the construction industry into the screen industries, and you wouldn't have to come in at like the early stage. And I think colleagues in some of the sign affiliated institutions are working on sort of career pathways and stuff. But yeah, there needs to be a lot more nuance and a lot more like education and information about how you can transfer between different industries.
Cool, thanks, Bethan.
So yeah, thanks for everyone for their questions, and thanks again to Bethan and James. So we're going to have a short break, I think. Oh, we're not having a short break. Okay, I've completely gone to pot with all the timing, so I've ruined all the tea and coffee. So the next session has two amazing options for everyone to choose from. So in here we have the wonderful Jo from Screen Yorkshire and Roxy from Film Hub North, who will be talking about the sort of talent development schemes that they're involved with. Or alternatively, we have World Builders with fantastic Dr. Alison Buxton in the breakout room, and that'll be focusing on sort of how to embed making and digital literacy into primary education. So the choice is yours, but they're both wonderful. So if you'd like to move now, yeah, perfect, that would be great. So the breakout room's just over there, sort of on the right, main room's here.
Apologies for that. We are running a few minutes late, but we'll just run on this session a little bit longer, just at the end, if that's okay. So, first of all, I'd like to introduce Roxy. We've had a slight switch round, so we're going to do Roxy from Film Hub North, who is the BFI Talent Executive at Film Hub North, and she's going to be talking about Scratch Me, which is her talent development scheme, and then we're going to move on to Jo from Screen Yorkshire to talk about Flex. The reason we've switched them around is actually because Scratch Me is a feeder into the Flex programme, so we thought it made more sense to tell you the story that way around. So over to Roxy, thank you very much.
Thanks Pip. Hi, my name's Roxy McKenna. I am a BFI Network talent exec, and BFI Network is kind of like the new talent of the British Film Institute. And our job is to support early career writers, directors and producers. We help them to move on that journey from having made nothing at all right through to feature. And the idea is that we are part of a pipeline of support from BFI Academy from a very young age right through to the Film Fund at the BFI. Just to give a quick overview of the type of work that we provide, so we have short film funding, we also fund the early stage of feature film ideas, we run training and event programmes, and Scratch Me is one of those. We also run mixers to connect talent together, and we also screen new talent's work as well. We're part of Film Hub North. I'm part of Film Hub North, and we've got offices in Newcastle, Sheffield and Manchester. Now, we kind of recognise that the traditional routes to feature film that the BFI have traditionally supported are changing. More people now want to work across film and television. Industry careers are evolving, and we have had to change the talent programmes that we now develop. So we do have 3 sort of pillar talent programmes, one for producers, one for directors and one for writers. But then we decided to create Scratch Me, which is about developing talent that has no experience whatsoever in the industry, and develop talent for any platform. But primarily we're focusing on television. We wanted to see how we could make this programme as inclusive as possible and open it up to talent from any background. So this was a talent programme that was open to people from across the north, but they could come from any kind of art form, so theatre, stand-up. We had novelists, poets, etc. We decided to think, how do we develop talent if we forget about track record? And we focus entirely on point of view and lived experience as the most important and exciting factor of that person's talent. Will it help diversify and enrich in the sector if we have a broader range of voices that haven't come through the traditional screen industry routes? And how can we help them to tell different stories? Because typically talent programmes start with a script or a strong track record, but we wanted to develop a programme which allowed us to play, take risks, and work with talent at that very early stage. So Scratch Me is a 3-month talent development programme. It was devised by Film Hub North, and it was supported by Sign, and we worked in partnership with Screen Yorkshire. It was initially designed as a feeder programme into the Flex programme, which Joe will talk about, because for Flex you need to have a certain level of experience and industry track record, and we wanted to focus on talent that might have nothing but fantastic ideas and characters and some creative background. We chose to focus on character because distinctive, bold characters are our access point to amazing stories, and without a great character you can't really have a fantastic story. So we thought we'd start there. Writers and writer performers and directors were invited to apply. And the barrier to entry, as I say, was kept very low. And we focused on writer performers because we've seen such an exciting wave of talent come through onto our screens who are writer performers as well. So we wanted to focus on them. We held lots of sessions to make sure the programme was accessible as possible. We worked in partnership with Queer Arts North, with DANC, the Disabled Artists Network, to hold information sessions. We worked with lots of partners across all those different art forms to get the word out to people from different creative backgrounds, because we were really excited about seeing if we widen the net to a broader range of creative backgrounds, what kind of new characters and ideas could we see come through. And we got over 300 applications. All right, I'll hurry up. We got over 300 applications. This is just in the north of England, and that was kind of 3 times more than we typically get for our talent programmes. So we were really excited to see the range of ideas that came in, and it was obviously meaning that the scheme was more accessible to have such a kind of diverse range of applications. We also realised that when you want to choose a career in the screen industry, you don't necessarily have teams or networks. So as part of the scheme, we brought producers onto the programme. We matched them up with directors as well. So people started to form a team on the scheme and had someone to work with as they developed their ideas. So we decided as well that you can't, obviously people have come with no screen experience whatsoever. So we attached mentors to each team who worked with them, one with for the writer and one for the director. They fed back on script and storyboard. We did a crash course in screenwriting because some of them have never written a script before, so they learned the kind of technicalities of script writing, structure, format, etc. We also created a public programme of events that ran alongside the internal work that we were doing. So we got these great speakers to come: Sophie Willan, Mark Gattis, the production team behind I May Destroy You, casting director Heather Baston, Francis Lee, the director, and they all did a public session, and they all kind of talked about how important it is to get unique, diverse voices on screen, and they each one focused on a different area of character development. For example, Sophie Willan was on how you take lived experience and make it an authentic character. But the great thing was that we then took these speakers and they had a round table with our talent as well, giving individual feedback on their ideas and on their characters. And it was important for us to choose, to put in there people who are, 3 of those people there who were speaking were from the north, and we wanted to inspire the people in the round table as well and show them that this was a journey they could take also. So each session they would have a round table with these guys and also hear each other's feedback. So they were constantly learning from each other. And at the end they had to have informal generals with Channel 4, BBC, Sky, where they received further support and feedback. So this is some of the talent that we developed. On the top row were the writers and writer performers, and on the bottom row the directors. We have novelists. In fact, none of them really came from a traditional background: theatre maker, stand-up, zine maker, social media performer, and a novelist. This is some of the characters that they created. So just to give a sense of the broad range of characters that came out of the north, where we had a supernatural drama which featured a Geordie trans werewolf, a family mystery about a 15-year-old African-American teen who's sent to live in Sheffield, a comedy drama about a mid-30s queer man who is described as a pride parade float happening in slow motion, and I could go on, but they're all very, very different and really kind of interesting and characters that we haven't necessarily seen on screen before, and certainly out of the north. We feel that it's important that there are some schemes out there that actually help create a level playing field for talent from the north and from any kind of background, where that spark, originality and lived experience is key, and we support the rest to be developed. And talent from this cohort went on, Harry in the top left there went on to Flex.
Beth as well.
And one of the directors went on to Flex as well. So and then some of the other ones were developed a feature. The bottom left one is being developed as a feature as part of the BFI, and also one of the other writers was selected for the BBC Northern Voices scheme. So we've been tracking their journeys throughout, and then the first pilot was supported by Sign, and then we had to go out and find funding for the second one, so we went to industry. We spoke to Fulwell 73, who are a production company set up in Sunderland, and though they're an international company, they were very much keen on finding and discovering new northern voices, so they funded the second iteration of the programme, and this is some of the projects that have come out of the second iteration that's just complete. So what we feel like we're doing is because industry has now funded it privately, we feel that not only are we kind of trying to bring talent that wouldn't necessarily have access to these opportunities on, we're also providing something that industry is actually looking for as well. And these are some of the projects that have just recently been developed. But that's it. Thanks.
Screen Yorkshire. So Joe is the talent development manager there, and Screen Yorkshire have been running 2 programmes in partnership with Sign, the Flex scheme, which we've just talked about a little bit, and also Script Ed, which is a scheme looking to increase representation of script editors, which has included training, mentoring and placements as well. So over to you, Joe.
Thank you. I'm just in case anyone's not aware of what Screen Yorkshire do, because we do lots of different things as well as talent development. I just want to show a show reel that kind of explains what we're about.
Here we go. Shh. You back.
Let's trot forward.
Oh yes.
Cheers for today. It's been the best day of my life.
Oh, you are more than welcome.
It is bigger than you or I, or any of us.
It's been a really first-class financial year.
Ah, there you are.
It has and will continue to unlock doors just from one experience with them.
It's definitely pushed you that step further.
Gives you a chance to be part of the industry, and as well as that, you get to make something that you're actually proud of.
It helped me be more open to meeting new people.
I literally never forget working on the Screen Yorkshire project. It was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done.
3, 2,
1,
go.
Blimey.
Quite something, isn't it?
I have lots of stories.
I know what you mean.
Something has changed, girl.
Are you ready for this?
There's no place on earth like it.
I came into the role about 2.5 years ago, and I've been trying to build that department and our impact and legacy work around creative talent ever since. I think there was... Is it coming up?
Back on now.
Brilliant.
Sorry. There we go.
So it's just some of the things that we do. When I first started, I had the brief of launching Flex, which is supported by Sign. And Flex is something that is a programme which is designed around future thinking in the industry, around agile storytelling and original IP, based on a traditional model of scripted TV and film. So that's looking at what's just around the corner in our industry, around XR, agile storytelling, immersive, all the different ways that are really kind of exploding, not too far distance, but in a language that commissioners and funders understand. So taking a film or a piece of scripted TV and wrapping that around with agile development, i.e. podcasting, gameplay, immersive, really trying to sort of stretch what creativity means when we're enjoying story. Quite an ambitious programme because it had never been done before. So we had an open call. We got nearly 300 applications, so it was massive. We had 30 places for 10 writers, 10 directors and 10 producers. Pitched at a kind of emerging talent. So somebody with a track record of having a footfall in industry, not for a new entrant, but not kind of so seasoned they can't you know, they're working on the next Apple show as a DP or something. We did a really thorough recruitment round, which took ages with all the interviews. But we're really interested in what people saw as potential for exploring ideas, how creative they could really kind of sense check what they thought people expected and what we could actually give them, to kind of stretch the imagination around a project like this. So we had 30 people confirmed on the programme, really, really interesting. 2 of whom had come off the Scratch Me programme, which was fantastic, just to prove that that pipeline works. We gave each team a 5k development budget, because the other thing that is really important around talent development programmes to remember is that creatives cannot work for free on talent development programmes. You have to give creatives a little bit of funding. The unique thing with Flex as well is that we didn't put people into teams. We asked individuals to coalesce around the kind of ideas that they wanted to tell, and then we asked them to go find their teams. We've run Flex twice now, so we've put 60 creatives through this programme, but the point where they have team formation is always quite challenging, because you feel very exposed as creative to say, well, these are the kind of ideas that I want to tell, who likes them. It's kind of like sports day feeling, where you think you might get rejected. So we try to build a lot of support into that to offer reassurance, and we build in a kind of a good 6 or 7 week element to the programme. So people come together to coalesce. We've got final teams confirmed, which is user-led, i.e. the programmes, people on the programmes find that solution for themselves. We give them the bursaries, and then we build in an awful lot of support in order for them to produce their project by the end of the 7-month programme. So there's a very clear objective at the end. It's for those teams to produce an industry-ready early development programme that has agile elements embedded within it. We're not prescriptive. We're not telling people what to do. This is emergent talent. They should be at a point in the career where they can really drive their own creative ideas. But we had to build a lot of support in to help people get to that point, because it's not a programme that had been done before. We're kind of breaking new ground with Flex. Every team got a development consultant for the full duration, and that was somebody who's really quite seasoned in industry. We offered mentoring. Each team had a mentor alongside that, because team dynamics in a group of 3 in a new team is quite a risky thing to do. You're not talking about a team that have years of experience. They're newly coming together. All of those anxieties, power struggles, people's different commitments outside of Flex all play a part in how those 3 people can work together. So mentoring is really important for any sort of talent development. And when I say mentoring / coaching, because I know we've got some coaches in the house, and big respect for how important coaching is. We also built in a lot of keynote sessions with BAFTA-winning writers, directors, really seasoned producers. We had people from XR Stories, really kind of like people who are working in industry who are trying to challenge the status quo of the ideas that we think we should be seeing and doing. We brought teams together 4 times across the duration of those 7 months, which was fully paid for, which I think is really important if you're thinking about EDI and access to barriers for development programmes. So we pay for things like accommodation, travel, food. We brought them together for at least 2 days to various points in the north of England. And in terms of talent development, I think it's really important to be mindful of that when you're running a programme. Because it's these sort of hidden costs which actually act as a real barrier for people who have the talent and should be developed in these kinds of ways. So we try to relieve that pressure. The other thing that I think was really successful in Flex is that we did manage to build a really strong community. So we've put we've done 2 programs. We put 60 creatives through, which is an awful lot, and that means we've got 20 projects that are now out in industry. But the community is still massive. what we've tried to factor into Flex is a really strong alumni, so Flex 1, for example, who graduated the programme a year ago, we've already brought all the Flex 1 back. We met in London. We had David Yates, who directed all the Harry Potter movies. He came in and did a really small, bespoke fireside chat with a Q&A. And it's just this incredible resource for networking, peer-to-peer support, signposting. A lot of the cohorts are working with each other outside of the teams that they originally put themselves into, which is a kind of an unexpected but very pleasant surprise. And I think that's the other fundamental when it comes to talent development. You've got to think longer than the programme. That alumni impact is really important because it's what ends up people, it's actually what gives people work. It's what makes people feel part of a community. It also addresses some of the social problems that the industry has, which is about isolation, a lack of feeling like you're connected to a community. Those things are really important for engagement and sustainability. So Flex delivers on those, but not by accident. We had a full day at the beginning of both Flex 1 and Flex 2 around values and a manifesto created by the cohort. And that was something that really enabled the cohort to feel like they had connected together and that they were doing the programme in a very kind of shared perspective. Which on paper you might kind of think, well, this is a talent development programme for above the line talent. Why are you doing a full day around developing a manifesto? But actually that cohort, for it to really have cohesion and to have it and for it to have longevity, it's really important, I think, in any talent development programme to have the investment up front. What we did as well for both programmes, because it is something that's very tailored towards industry and trying to get industry to connect with the things that Flex was doing around agile storytelling, we held two showcase events for Flex 1 and a showcase event for Flex 2. And that meant that these projects that have been developed that might be kind of what appears to be a 6-part traditional series, but actually it's got a podcast, it's got a VR experience, it's got gameplay attached to it, whatever it might be, they got to pitch that. So we had a day of pitching where each team got to pitch to up to 9 commissioners or gatekeepers. And then we had a networking evening with regional indies, stakeholders, industry, agents. We did that for both cohorts. And I have to say, like, the engagement from industry has been really, really strong. So in person, they pitched to Disney, ITV, BBC, Film 4, Channel 4, ITV, Sony Pictures, NBC Universal, Seesaw Films, quite a long list. And that sort of access, where it's just for your programme, is really, really valuable, because, as I've said to both cohorts, the showcase day does feel like a big culmination endpoint, but that's just the beginning of a conversation. You're literally just kind of opening the gate and shooing the project out the door, and then you've got to, as a producer, director, writer team, make sure that those projects have still got the power behind it. I can see a wrap-up sign. So that's Flex, and I think it's a useful test case for looking at what you need to bed into talent development programmes to really make them impactful, and not something that's kind of, well, I've done that, tick. It's actually something that stays with creative and then builds into their life cycle. I am going to wrap up, but I just really briefly want to talk about Scripted as well, which is the other, I think, really important talent development programme that we're doing at Screen Yorkshire, again, which is supported by Sign. But through Flex, we realised that there is a lack of diverse script editors in the industry, and there's some very, very strong research that lots of problems with access to barriers to access for people who come from underrepresented communities, global majority people. And we had producers who were saying, look, I'm working on a scripted idea and I cannot get a script editor who can understand the writer's perspective, because there just isn't people with different heritage who are script editors. And script editors are a really fundamental part of the talent pipeline for storytelling. And ultimately, script editors go on to be those big, influential decision makers, commissioners, etc. So getting that talent pipeline right is really, really important. And there's an awful lot of courses which the researcher talked about. There's an awful lot of courses, but very few courses around script editing are really understanding that need for editorial pipeline transition. So we got somebody from Sign. We were able to take on 22 people who have got some experience around scripts, but have not yet worked as a script editor, or people who are pivoting into scripts from publishing, or they've taken a leave for childcare and responsibilities. And we gave them keynotes, we gave them training, final draft training, and then we took a majority of them into placements and actually gave them hands-on experience. And that's been really, really successful. Industry are so hungry for that. And the amount of applications we've got for Script Ed was so strong, it just reaffirmed to me that the talent is there. It's not about finding the talent, it's about giving talent access. So we're very hopeful that Script Ed gets to run again, because the industry feedback has been so strong, and I know that several of them are up for jobs, but fundamentally the need is there. So I'm going to wrap up now, because I'm going to see that sign again in a sec. So that's Screen Yorkshire. We always have new things up and coming. Keep an eye out for our website if anybody wants to know more. I think my details are on the next slide. I feel like I'm going to get the prize for Best Ramble. I hope that happens. Thank you very much.